Jerome was known as a ghost town. In 1899, San Francisco wrote an article calling Jerome the wickedest city in America. In 1903, the New York Sun wrote an article calling it the wickedest city in the West. So you can see its reputation from the West Coast to the East Coast was widely known, and I'll tell you, it truly lived up to it. You'll come to realize this with all the information I have to give you. One of the reasons is because we had a lot of gunfights in the streets. That is actually the first reason that they say the streets of Jerome are paved in blood. The second I gave you earlier. So murders, homicides, suicides, and drug overdoses were all the norm here. So we had over 80 full-time working bordellos, 20 saloons, and 19 opium dens. Which is kind of hard to envision because we only have about 450 people here. But at one point in time, we had over 20,000 people up here in this 1.5 mile radius.
Wow. Right?
So the reason we had so many people here is because in 1888, Mr. William A. Clark came in and purchased the United Birdie copper mine for $80,000. So he was an extremely brilliant businessman, but he was also extremely ruthless, much like a mafia leader. Just real cold. So by 1905, he had the mine making $1 million a month, and that was back in his day. So that's $28 million today. Yeah. Between 1914 and 1918, the value of copper skyrocketed. So that's due to World War I. They were using the copper with the bullet shells. He was actually making $10 million a month during that time. Yes. So he was also extremely influential. So he had 55 of these Victorian homes here built. You can see this one here. There's only 14 left standing today. But the 55 used to wrap around here. This was known as Company Hill, all the way around to the shop that we were just in. Prior to his arrival, it was known as a camp. So there was 500 men here. They used to use the horses with the buggies to bring up their supplies, and also the donkeys with the sacks on their backs. So he came in, he built the train system, the narrow gauge, that made them able to bring in the supplies and also the people that I said he brought in. So we became the largest copper producer in the entire country at that point in time. With that much success, we had people moving here from all over the world. 32 countries. I won't list them all for you, but I will give you a handful. Because the majority of them came from Ireland, Poland, Mexico, China, and Germany. It was extremely segregated here. Down there was Irish town. Over by the sliding jail was Mexican town, and we even had Asian town. That's how many people we had here from all over the world. So they came here looking for a better opportunity. Upon arrival, they realized that they were deceived. One of the first things they had to do was sign a contract, stating that if they became maimed or disfigured in any way, shape, or form, they could no longer walk the streets in the day and they had to walk the alleys at night.
Nuh-uh.
Oh yeah. He told them this is because he didn't want them to cause fear to the women and children. But in reality, he just did not want his new employees to see what their potential future could be. With that much money, he had a lot of people in his back pocket, including the mayor. So the mayor put into effect that if they were no longer working and they were seen in the business district, they'd be considered loitering, trespassing, fined, and thrown in jail. So if you can imagine, someone has their leg amputated from an accident. They don't have the financial means to go home because they came from over the seas or over the borders. Now they just want the emotional support of their friends, but they're pretty much exiled. And I'm not saying that they murdered anybody, but they most certainly did not stop the deaths from happening. There was a gentleman who had his legs burnt off in the smelter. By the time he got to the hospital, they realized that he was of no use to them, so they sent him home before he had a chance to heal. The doctor that was working that evening did have some compassion, so he gave him a large quantity of morphine and said, take as much as you need. The doctor then walked down to Clarkdale and took a train and said, I can no longer work for these heartless people. So unfortunately, Juan did commit suicide with that morphine, but had he not, the infection would have killed him. So in 1917, they had enough. They went on strike. They wanted safer working conditions, better pay, and health benefits. Well, Mr. Clark did, he had 67 of them gathered up, sent out to Kingman. He then had them beaten and said, if you value your lives, you will not return. The second time they went on strike, he sent them down to Bisbee. But now there's news articles circulating around about how he's treating his miners, so he decides to go ahead and make a compromise. So he gives them monthly credits to the bordellos, credits to the opium dens, and this is his way of keeping them subdued, because if they're high, they're probably not going to fight back. And he also gave them the death benefits that I told you about earlier. Yes. So there was a fire that was burning down the mine for 22 years. Mr. Clark had called in some people to put it out from out of the country, but they were unsuccessful. So when it would rain, it would cause steam. The miners were getting hurt, although I don't believe that was his primary concern, is the fact that it was hampering production. So he decided to turn the mine into an open pit mine. But as I said, he built this town. He wanted his legacy to carry on. So he was a little bit more careful when he did that. But he passed away in 1925. At that point in time, his sons took over the mine, but they both passed in 1932. Unrelated accidents, but they both passed pretty close, so I don't know if that's a coincidence or not. One was a plane accident here, shortly after was a car accident. So at that point in time, his daughter Huguette took over the mine, but he didn't have her until he was 64, so she never got an opportunity to learn how to operate the mine, nor do I think she wanted to. So she sold it off in 1935 to Phelps Dodge for $20 million. Now when they came in, they had no concern or respect for the residents here whatsoever, or the town of Jerome. So they started blasting with anywhere from 50,000 to 200,000 pounds of dynamite, while being aware of the fact that Jerome is built on a sinkhole with 4 major fault lines running through it. So what that caused was earthquake effects. Some of the town was left in rubble. Homes and businesses were collapsing. That's why there's only 14 out of the 55 left standing today. They got hit the hardest because the mine is located right up here. So for those that did not immediately collapse, they were sliding down the hill 1.5 feet a month. That's where the sliding jail comes in. That's our greatest example of how strong these blasts were. Also the 3rd hospital, when I told you the south wing collapsed, that was also from the blasting. So at that point in time, the residents in the town of Jerome got together and they sued Phelps Dodge. But all they received was $52,000, which was pretty much a slap in the face considering how many people lost their lives, homes, and businesses here. Yeah. So they also used to call Jerome a huge tinderbox. And that's because it was plagued by several fires, and I do mean several, but 4 of them took out a majority of the town. In 1894, 1897, 1898, and 1899. At this time, everything was built with wood, so when a fire occurred, it spread rapidly. This is the very first fire. There was a working lady that was having a dispute with her customer. She had a lantern in her hand. She went to throw it at him. She missed, and it went out the window. So the bartender from the saloon next door happened to see it occurring, so he was riding around on his horse, shooting off his gun to let people know there was a fire because there was no fire station. It got so bad that people started throwing up tents for their homes and tents for their businesses. They didn't have the financial means to rebuild year after year after year. So you can find pictures with tents up and it says law office. It wasn't until 1899 when Jerome became incorporated that they did something about it. The first thing they did was build that fire station. The second thing they did is they put into effect that moving forward, when we rebuild, you would have to use brick or concrete in order to prevent the fires from spreading. And for just a moment, I'm going to take you back to when the natives were living here. We are all aware of history, so unfortunately some did lose their lives fighting back. But I'm going to tell you this because there's a woman who lives out by the Gold King mine. She said she could see 3 of their spirits in her kitchen with their long, straight black hair chanting, "We are here, we are here, we are here." Soon after, some natives actually went up to the Gold King mine and said that their ancestors were calling them. They were well aware of their neighbor's story, led them over there, found out indeed this is what we're looking for. They came back a week later to do a ceremony to release their souls. Right? How cool is that? I wish I had those kind of spiritual gifts. I'm like, they're calling me, let me in. I'm just kidding. So, I just want to give you a little bit of history here so you can understand why it's known as a ghost town. Also, the reason I brought you here today is because this is where Jerome's first hospital once stood. It was built in 1894. It burnt down in 1898. A lot of nurses, patients, and doctors lost their lives here. So for that reason, we usually get a lot of communication. So I'm going to go ahead and shut up now because, trust me, I can talk about history all day. But I want them to talk to you now, so if you want to unmute.
Does the time continue to slide?
So they say, I've heard people say about 1/8 of an inch. They have planted a ton of trees to help the earth repair itself. Also in the back of this church here, there used to be a cemetery. Well, they moved the names to the front of the bricks. But for that reason,